My name is George Talbot. I'm Provost Chancellor for Research and Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences here at Edge Hill. If it's your first visit to the campus, and I think it is for some of you, you're particularly welcome. And it's a nice spring evening to be here after a rather wet morning. Anyway, I'm delighted, as well as welcoming you, to introduce Rosa Fong's film, Deconstructing Zoe. One of the more pleasurable aspects of my job is chairing something called the Research Investment Fund, which meets a couple of times a year and looks at cases that are put forward for us to invest in, where we see an opportunity of a research project coming together with the injection of some cash to turn into a strong research output for something called the Research Excellence Framework, which happens in this country every 5, 6 or 7 years. And we had a case that was put forward by Rosa to support the making of this film, and we considered it, and it's not a straightforward request of the kind that we would normally get. Mostly outputs are papers published in journals or books or whatever else. Making a film is more of an undertaking that we need to give due consideration to make sure that the university is getting value for money for its investment. But we did decide, after giving it a detailed appraisal, that this really was something that we wanted to invest in. It was potentially something really, really powerful. And so it's a particular pleasure to welcome along members of Rosa's extended family and friends and colleagues and various others to the university this evening. The way the evening is going to go, I'm going to hand over to Roger in a moment to tell you something more about the Institute for Creative Enterprise, of which he is the director, and of Rosa's filmmaking career to date. Then we're going to watch the film, and then Roger is going to chair a Q&A at the end. But without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Professor Roger Shannon.
Thank you, George. Yes, ICE is the host for this evening's screening and discussion, and ICE is one of the university's 3 research institutes, and we regularly run public events in Creative Edge, which are often connected to projects or research areas of colleagues in the various departments and faculties of the university. But I mean, this evening I'm particularly pleased to be able to host Rosa's film, Deconstructing Zoe. Rosa is a senior lecturer in film and TV in the Department of Media, and has over 15 years, maybe 20 now, because I'm reflecting on having known Rosa since the mid-90s. But she's been involved with filmmaking, the British Film Institute, the Arts Council of England, Channel 4, the BBC, etc. A very accomplished filmmaker working on dramas, documentaries and music videos. Our paths crossed in the mid-90s when Rosa had made a film called Red for the British Film Institute. And I always say this quote to do with Rosa's film, because I think it's a way of indicating the significance of her filmmaking. What was said about Red is that Red is one of the very few British films to examine a British-Chinese culture clash on a level other than a comedic one. And I think Rosa's work has followed a path which has brought attention to many aspects of the British and Chinese cultural connections. So I was very pleased that Rosa has been able to make this film at Edge Hill, particularly in a week when film industry research has shown that there's a woeful ratio of women directors making programs for film and television. So it's very heartening to hear George's views there about Edge Hill playing its bit in helping women directors make their movies, and hopefully more in the future. After the film, there'll be a discussion with Rosa Fong and Dr. Felicia Chan from the University of Manchester, and they will be joined after a short while by Zoe, who is here this evening, and we're really delighted that Zoe has been able to join us this evening, and that will be a Q&A at the end of the evening. So thank you, and hope you enjoy Rosa's film Deconstructing Zoe.
I mean, can you say a bit about how you started working on this project, and what was the motivation for it?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in identity, particularly, British East Asian identity as well, and all my work deals with issues around British East Asian identity. And I was interested in the sense of race, and can race be performed? For instance, seeing my mother sometimes, the way that she would be in front of people was very different to the way that she was in front of me or the family. And it occurred to me that she was performing an idea of a racial stereotype that was expected of her. So that kind of got me thinking. But also then at that time, I'd made a little short film with another senior lecturer over in performing arts called Council House Movie Star. And we talked a lot about performance and gender and performance. So the two things kind of intertwined. And of course, I'd already met Zoe, and I was really fascinated by her transition from being mainly on the stage. Zoe mainly was on the stage, but more lately, as time went on, Zoe was more out in public. So I was interested again with that, about that transition and how that had occurred in her life.
So how do you see the questions of race and gender kind of being advanced after this project? I mean, do you have another project in mind, or are you going to work on this further?
Yeah, I think the act of making this documentary was very much, there were a lot of research questions around what I wanted to explore with them. Some of those have been answered, some of them haven't. So certainly I will pick up on some of those questions, and they may. Just now I'm interested in, I'm developing a project called Yellow is the New Black, which is all about yellow facing and some of the things that the girls spoke about in the documentary about how difficult it is for them to assert British East Asian identity on the screen. So that's something that I'm going to be working with British East Asian actors, and working that into a small film, and hopefully making that into a bigger project, looking at screen identities of British East Asians in Britain and America, because there's a lot of work, of course, being done in America on on East Asian identity, or the lack of it, I should say.
So I wonder if you find, this is something that I'm seeing in my own work, I wonder if you find that with the rise of China as a kind of economic powerhouse, whether you find that the diasporic Chinese communities, or diasporic East Asian communities, which have maybe lived in the West for two or three generations, and maybe have no real allegiance to China as such, have to kind of fight a double battle of for visibility. I mean, where the kind of British East Asian or Asian American community used to kind of stand in for a particular kind of Chineseness. With the rise of China and the rise of the Chinese films and media, that diasporic communities struggle with.
It's a very difficult thing, isn't it? I think, yes, definitely the people. East Asians in America have a much, by the way, they could just call themselves Asians in America. They have a much stronger voice, and there seems to be this sense of, more unity within, certainly within the artistic community in America. And in UK, it tends to be much more fractured. And yes, there is a growing interest in China, but it tends to be about mainland China. So again, second, third generation Chinese like myself and my kids, they find it very hard to find that space. And again, it gets back to casting. So, when some of these guys go up for casting calls, it's like, well, can you speak with an accent? What kind of accent? Any accent, as long as it sounds Chinese. And, these guys have been here for 2 generations, We don't see those sorts of faces on TV, maybe more in theatre or in film, You know, we're always fresh off the boat. You know, my family have been here 4 generations, but we just don't see that reflected in British TV. And like I say, in America, it is slightly better, and maybe it is because of the power of the dollar, you know, coming over from China, and there's more of a drive to, you know, appease the Chinese viewing public over in the mainland. But I don't think that's started to happen here yet. I mean, we had the recent issue of Royal Shakespeare Company, and they did a classical Chinese play, which is fine, and they cast all white people in those roles, which again, you know, having white people playing those roles is fine. But the final thing that took the biscuit was that the only 2 Chinese people that they cast was a maid and a dog. And that's, you know, we're talking, you know, what was that, 2015?
I think it was last year, yeah.
2015. So there's still a real struggle, I think, for visibility in this country for British East Asians, and I think the girls in my film said that so eloquently.
I thought Ebony in the film was added a really interesting dimension, a kind of black trans character in the film. Because of course black, white and East Asian white dynamics and power relations are slightly different. Was Ebony already in the picture, or was it conscious choice to add her in?
I mean, Ebony is such a fantastic person, you know, she's very eloquent, and, you know, she, again, you know, she says she's a third sex, you know, she kind of like celebrates those differences, and I just really wanted to have her voice in there, you know, as a range, because, you know, you meet Ebony, she's really tall, especially with heels on, she's very imposing, and that, but when she becomes Ebony, you know, you saw in that shot where she puts the wig on, and as soon as she lifts her head and she's got the wig on, she's suddenly Ebony, you know. And even me, myself, you know, I find myself opening doors for her, you know, pulling out chairs for her. It's that performance, and again, she gives off that performance, you know. And I think she gives off quite, as a female persona, she's very English, I think, whatever that may be, but she strikes me as being very English. So again, one of the questions was, well, you know, is Ebony performing race in a different way as well?
Maybe it's time to
bring Zoe down.
Hi Zoe. You talked a lot about gender fluidity and the spectrum. That's quite, for me, is quite a new term that's, I feel, coming through a lot lately. Do you think you see yourself differently now on the spectrum as you did coming out?
Well, I mean, the word fluid actually means you're constantly evolving, and I think, of course, I feel very different, and I think I look at things very differently as well, because at one stage in my life, I think I was very much more a gay man who was dressing up, and I think that was when I was mainly stage, because I was doing it mainly for stage. But now Zoe is very much part of Chowie's life, and I am out as Zoe a lot more. I think, yes, I do view it differently, in that I think maybe I'm certainly identifying more as transgender than I am gay.
This is to Zoe and to Rosa. First of all, fantastic. It was a really excellent documentary, so well done. So I know you've known each other a long time. How did you get to know each other? Where did you meet?
Oh, gosh.
I think I was in
Way Out?
No. No, I remember exactly when I met Rosa, actually, because I was in the production of Salome.
Oh, yeah.
And Ray Young, who's a director I work with a lot, was researching something, and he had contacted Rosa, and I think Ray...
He's doing his MA on
right.
British Chinese filmmakers, and so he'd interviewed me and then
That's
brought me
right.
around.
And then he said, I think you should come and watch this play, because I was in Ray's play before that, and then that's how we connected. And I think, yeah, because we were Asians, I was an actor, Rose was a filmmaker, we had a lot in common and a lot to talk about, and I think a lot of shared experiences, I guess. So, and that's how it started out, sparked off a friendship. Yeah.
And was Rosa wearing those new romantic clothes?
Rosa had a very different haircut then.
Neon.
I really enjoyed the film, and I was very struck by your kind of discovery of self-identity and self-image through your life. And I wonder how much we could expand on your either need to portray yourself as Zoe to others, and how much that's affected your building your identity and image and comfort with that.
So I'm not sure what. Am I comfortable in?
Yes, as a child, you starting to discover yourself and your own identity, and that progresses. But later in life, you're portraying yourself, performing very much to others, and that continued. And I wondered how important that was to you in discovering yourself.
Well, I think it's very, very much. I think because I am fluid. I started, even though I identified as I said when I was very, very young. I used to play with my cousins, and I would always take on the female persona. But when I came out to my parents as gay, I then was a gay man, albeit a very effeminate gay man. But I was identified as a gay man. But then there was another layer, I think, to my identity, which was this the feminine, and I think my work or the stage gave me a platform to explore that. So yes.
Can I just ask? Just a quick question. Have you gone back to Malacca as Zoe, or do you still return as Chowie?
I returned. My family are aware of Zoe, but I have not gone back as Zoe.
Okay.
So when I go back as Chowie, but it's like one of those things where everybody knows, but nobody discusses. But having said that, I brought Occasional Orchid back to Singapore and to KL, so I performed it. So my family, all in the extended family, came to see the show, and so they are very much aware. And I think because of the work I do, it gives me a space to be who I am without the baggage, which I think a lot of transgender people go through, because a lot of transgender people have to come out to the family and and deal with what the aunties think, or whereas I never kind of had that, because people knew what I was and what I did, and seeing it on stage, seeing me on stage gave me sort of this freedom, I guess, to express myself.
First of all, congratulations, Rosa. My question is for you. It's a bit more about the sort of filmmaking process. How much of it for you was research and knowing the subject already, being close friends, and how much was it a discovery doing the documentary?
I mean, of course, I'd known Chowie anyway, and like I said to Felicia, I'd already been mulling over the idea of wanting to explore this notion of performing race and then latterly performing gender as well, and then Zoe popped into my head. So I actually took a number of trips down to London, didn't I? And we chatted quite a lot about, Zoe's experience, about, her work and the way that she'd explored her gender identity through her work and on stage. And I think, I agree with Zoe that she's been very fortunate that she has been able to explore her gender identity on stage, and it has been, quite an okay transition. Of course, a lot of transgender people don't have that luxury. So once we'd kind of like talked through the things that we wanted to include, the form that it might take, and then I with most of my documentaries, I've always used some sort of performance in there as well. So we discussed the plays that Zoe had been in Third Sex was one, and then we decided on Occasional Orchid because it was very relevant and pertinent to the film I wanted to make. So then we set about, organising the performance pieces. And then I also thought about the people that we wanted to interview. Whose voices did we want to hear, given, the nature of, exploring identity? And we purposely chose a different set of people. We thought it also, I think you had a question about Neil, we felt it was really important also to get the other side of the story as well, as somebody who's a trans admirer as well. So we were very, very fortunate that Neil was absolutely fine about being interviewed, because a lot of men wouldn't be at all. In fact, they, as intimated in the film, a lot of these guys lead a double life. So we were very, very fortunate to get that interview with Neil as well. And then it was a lot of weekends, trips to London, working late nights, working with June for weeks and weeks on the edit and everything, and coming in here to teach full time as well. So, and then going home to the kids as well. So it was a very long process. In fact, we started making this film probably about
2.5 years ago.
2.5 years ago. So we'd shot some interviews, and then in the summer we came into the studio and we did so it was a very slow process.
But I think in terms of the process, I think Rosa and I have been talking about gender, race, the exotification of Eastern femininity for the last 10 years. I think. It's been something that we've talked about, because every time I come across, or for my personally, for me as an Asian man, why is Asian man sexuality so weak and so
seen as
invisible?
weak.
Yeah, seen as weak. Whereas the minute I become a woman, I become this sort of, and okay, I play a certain role. I don't play a dowdy girl. So I play a certain type of female, I admit. But when I play this role, I go out there and the people interact with me, or men interact with me so differently. And that's always been something which I've been very curious about why that is. And I think this is something that Rosa is also very curious about. Therefore, we had a lot of very long discussions in my kitchen about it. And then I think it kind of informed the documentary. And I think it sort of certainly, Occasional Orchid is a play that explored all these themes of exotification of Asian women, imperialism, colonialism, performativity of gender and race.
There was a question mark. Yeah.
Thanks very much. This was really very interesting. I wanted to ask about a marker of identity that I think is like the unconscious of the film, but we haven't spoken about yet, which is age. So we've talked about gender, and we've talked about ethnicity. We haven't talked about age, so I was hoping you could say a few words about how age affects identity in this kind of mix.
I think, as I said, the older you are, the less you care about what people think of you. And I think, certainly for me, as I've aged, I've become a lot less self-conscious, a lot less concerned about what other people might think. I think when you are younger, you have a lot more baggage, I think, about how you're perceived by society at large. But I think once you hit a certain age and you feel much more comfortable in your own skin, then it's no longer an issue as such. But we do live.
Sorry, go on.
But we do live in a society where it exalts anything that's youthful, and when you reach a certain age, you become more and more invisible.
But yeah, I just wanted to pick on that, maybe not quite specifically answering your question, but I think this thing about age is really important because, of course, obviously you get a lot of very young trans people who, like I said, for them the transition isn't quite so seamless, because they have a lot of, obviously through teenage years, a lot of self-doubt and that. And I think that's why it's so wonderful that, trans issues are being put into the foreground now, because certainly, with my daughter's, friendship groups, they talk about gender and gender identity, You know, so they're well versed in that, and I think that can only make for a healthier society, especially for young people, because I think one of the things that Ebony, me, and even Joe talked about was, you know, young trans people who think that this binary essentialism is the only way to go, i.e. you can only be male or female. And a lot of them might feel that they're not quite one or the other, and they think, well, you know, I'm a bit effeminate, so I must be a girl, or, you know, I'm a tomboy, I must be a boy. And they go through that transition that we were talking about. And actually, for them, that might be the wrong thing to do, because, you know, they are, you know, as you say, genderqueer. So why do they need to have the physical body of, you know, that gender which they identify with? So I think that's a key issue.
I think part of the issue is that transsexualism, however that's defined, is very often kind of pathologized, because it's seen as a medical condition. It's seen as you need to get a certificate in order to kind of perform in society. So I think that's medicalizing it is part of the problem, and medicalization does not really allow for fluidity. You know, you have to be one thing or the other.
Yeah. I mean, the reason why I'm fluid and I haven't, I still have a male persona is because I haven't changed my passport. And to be able to change my passport, I have to sit in front of a panel of psychiatrists, or 3 psychiatrists, and then to be certified by them to get my gender recognition certificate, to be able to change my gender to female. But I don't particularly want to be defined as female all the time or as male all the time. I want to have this flexibility, this fluidity, and that's what it is. And I'm hoping that, you know, perhaps in time, as you say, you know, maybe the medical profession will change and not be so strict, so stringent and so rigid.
If there's a question, I'll have to make that the last question.
Thank you. The film was quite provocative in many levels, and this is not so much a question as much as it is my looking at this as a research project and what questions emanate from the initial questions that made the project possible, because after the project, then the project raises other questions. And for me, it's a commentary on the tyranny of biology upon the construction, the deployment of biological choices upon the construction of an identity. And also, it speaks to how race theory and gender theory actually are very instrumental in serving as blockages to dealing with the betrayal of the human body. That everything we live around and live with is 21st century, and the only archaic thing that we construct narratives around is the human body. And internet is alluring in that regard, that we can click ourselves into existence in a way, we can click others into existence. That fluidity at a virtual level appeals to us because of the need, the intrinsic need to be fluid. And once then we remove race and gender out of the picture, then we deal with the problem of being human and the intransigence, notions of intransigence that we have colluded with, like the deployment of biological choices that we've taken as ours, and not look at them as deployments upon our construct, at the construction of our identities as choices that we didn't have a say in. Then look at the question of being human, because the question of the passport, it's a Kafkaesque question of how documents regulate human existence on the planet. And for me, then the question that is raised from this research project is, it highlights the fallacy of race theory and gender theory as having as delaying tactics to dealing with the question of being human, because once we deal with that question, we realize the betrayal, the ribbons of betrayal that binds us all. Thank you.
Very interesting.
I wonder, Rosa, if you could just mention some of the research questions that you had at the beginning of the...
Yeah, how much is gender performative? Can race be performed? In what form does that take? If one plays on a cultural stereotype and claims that cultural stereotype, does it liberate us or does it actually enslave us? And I think this gets back to your question about female subjectivity, and we were just discussing, you know, as women playing into this, you know, fantasy of oriental submissive flower. For us as women, I don't think it's easy for us to step out of that, but I think Zoe very eloquently says it's only because she's a man playing a woman that she's able to reclaim that power. So that was also one of the questions that I was exploring. And then the other question was, you know, can all of these very almost transient questions be captured on film? And also, you know, can I just make a film and have these research questions in the background, you know, make a film essentially that stands as a film in itself?
We have to finish now, and I'd like to thank our three speakers.
Can I make a last quick comment?
Okay.
Things may be moving on, because I think just a few days ago the Philippines has elected its first trans member of parliament.
Oh.
So, yeah.
I'd like to thank Zoe and Rosa for this evening, taking us on a very, very stimulating, interesting journey in the Q&A, and obviously thank Rosa for a great film, and Zoe for her performance in that film. And they've been deconstructing Zoe.
This is waiting to say.